How much can a silent act of generosity change the course of not just one life, but two? Eleanor Wilson never imagined the answer as she anonymously transferred funds each semester to support her neighbor's son through medical school. Just a way to make a difference, she told herself, watching from her window as the brilliant young man packed his car for another term. 7 years passed this way, her secret locked safely away, her satisfaction found in glimpsing his occasional visits home, in overhearing snippets about his academic success. But on a bright Tuesday morning, as crushing pain engulfed her chest and the world darkened around her, Eleanor couldn't have known that the hands working desperately to restart her failing heart belonged to the very same young man she had quietly supported all those years. As consciousness flickered between darkness and light, neither of them recognized how their lives had been invisibly intertwined by fate and kindness until now. This is the extraordinary true story of how one woman's anonymous gift created a doctor who would one day save her life, and how some debts can never truly be repaid, only passed forward. Eleanor Wilson's alarm clock never had the chance to ring at 6 a.m. For 23 years as a professor of English literature, and now 15 years into retirement, her internal clock roused her precisely at 5:47 each morning. Today was no different as she slid her feet into worn slippers beside her bed, a queen size that still felt too large for just one person even after all these years. Morning light filtered through lace curtains she'd hung with Frank just after they'd purchased the brownstone in 1985. Back then, Newbury Street was less polished, their neighborhood on the edge of becoming fashionable rather than firmly established as one of Boston's most desirable addresses. They'd stretched themselves financially to buy it, believing it would be filled with children's laughter someday. Eleanor moved to the kitchen with practiced efficiency, filling the copper kettle that was a wedding gift and setting it on the stove. Each morning, Earl Grey tea, one slice of whole wheat toast with a scraping of marmalade, and the crossword puzzle from yesterday's Boston Globe that she saved specifically for this quiet moment. "Good morning, Frank," she whispered to the photograph on her kitchen windowsill, touching the frame lightly before turning to retrieve her reading glasses from their designated hook. From her kitchen window, Eleanor could see into the small courtyard shared by the brownstones on her block. Gloria Rodriguez was already leaving for work, her nurse's aide uniform visible beneath her open coat. Eleanor watched as the younger woman locked her door, checked her watch, and hurried toward the tea station. Gloria worked double shifts on Tuesdays at the assisted living facility in Cambridge, which meant she wouldn't be home until well after dark. Eleanor felt the familiar twinge of concern for her neighbor. 15 years as a single mother had etched permanent lines of fatigue around Gloria's eyes, yet she never complained, not when the building's heating failed during the harshest winter in decades, not when she'd worked 3 jobs simultaneously to keep up with rent increases. Not even when her brilliant son Jason had received his Harvard acceptance letter, only to realize that even with scholarships, the financial mountain seemed insurmountable. Finishing her tea, Eleanor moved to her study, a small room lined with bookshelves containing first editions of Austen, Woolf, and Morrison. The antique writing desk that centered the room had been her sanctuary for decades, first as she graded papers and prepared lectures, now as she managed her surprisingly substantial finances. Frank had been prudent, some might say obsessive, about insurance. The life insurance policy, combined with his pension and the investments that had performed remarkably well, left Eleanor with a portfolio that generated more annual income than she knew what to do with. Their modest lifestyle had never required much, and without children to support or indulge, her wealth had accumulated silently, almost embarrassingly. She unlocked the bottom drawer and removed the leather portfolio containing her foundation. Paperwork. The Eleanor and Franklin Wilson Educational Trust existed only in the most technical legal sense, a private foundation with a single, anonymous beneficiary. Her financial advisor had questioned the arrangement initially. "Wouldn't you prefer to support multiple students, or have the college establish a named scholarship?" he had suggested. But Eleanor had been adamant. This wasn't about recognition. or building a legacy. This was about Jason Rodriguez, the boy who had grown up across the hall, who had helped her carry groceries when her arthritis flared, who had sat on her balcony during middle school, discussing Dickens and Hemingway with a passion that reminded her of her younger self. As she reviewed the latest statement, she allowed herself a small smile. Jason was in his final year of residency now. Cardiology. His mother mentioned it, with unmistakable pride whenever they crossed paths in the hallway. 7 years of anonymous transfers, 7 years of watching from a distance as Gloria's burden lightened slightly, as Jason's future unfolded according to his potential rather than his circumstances. Eleanor never planned to reveal herself as his benefactor. The foundation was structured to dissolve upon her death, with any remaining funds transferring to Jason without explanation. Her lawyer understood her instructions. No posthumous letters, no dramatic revelations. The gift was complete in itself, requiring nothing in return. She returned the portfolio to its drawer and locked it. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 as she moved to her reading chair by the bay window overlooking the street. Another Tuesday was unfolding. Mrs. Abernathy walking her Yorkie, the barista opening the cafe on the corner, students streaming toward the university with backpacks and travel mugs. Eleanor picked up her current novel, fingers finding her place automatically. Her life was orderly, predictable, and entirely her own. At 62, she had made peace with solitude, finding richness in routine and quiet satisfaction in her secret role in Jason's journey. Some might find her existence lonely, but Eleanor knew better. There was a difference between being alone and being lonely, a distinction she had spent 15 years perfecting. As she settled into her reading, she had no way of knowing that the careful boundaries between her life and the Rodriguez family were about to collapse entirely, or that the young man whose future she had quietly secured would soon be frantically fighting to ensure she had any future at all. The university campus bustled with midweek activity as Eleanor made her way along the familiar paths. Though retired, she maintained an office in the English department as Professor Emerita, coming in twice weekly to mentor graduate students and occasionally guest lecture. The arrangement kept her connected to academic life without the grinding responsibilities of full-time teaching. "Professor Wilson," a young woman with bright blue hair waved enthusiastically from a bench. "I implemented your suggestions on my thesis chapter." "The committee was impressed." Eleanor paused, searching her memory. "Ms. Patel, yes? I'm glad to hear it. Your analysis of gender dynamics in modern American fiction showed genuine promise." The exchange warmed her as she continued toward Widener Library. This was the rhythm of her life now. Meaningful work without overwhelming obligation, respect without constant demands on her energy. She had carefully constructed this balance after Frank's death, when grief had threatened to swallow her whole. Structure became her salvation, reliable patterns that carried her forward when emotion alone could not. Inside her small office, Eleanor reviewed her calendar. 2 graduate advisees today, then lunch with Harriet Lowell, her closest friend. From the department and one of the few people with whom she socialized regularly, Eleanor and Harriet had started at the university in the same year, navigating the male-dominated academic environment together in the early 1980s. Now, both widowed, they shared a weekly lunch that provided Eleanor with just enough social interaction to satisfy her modest needs. At precisely 1:15, Eleanor met Harriet at their usual table in the faculty club. "You're looking well," Harriet said, assessing her friend over reading glasses. "Still keeping up with your walking regimen?" Eleanor nodded. 3 miles every morning, weather permitting. Dr. Feldman insists it's essential for heart health at our age. Speaking of health, Harriet lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Have you heard about Dean Matthews? Collapsed right in the middle of a faculty meeting. Stress, they're saying, but rumor has it his blood pressure was through the roof." Eleanor made appropriate noises of concern while reflecting on how different her internal landscape was from her external presentation. Colleagues, like Harriet, saw her as they always had, composed, intellectually sharp, perhaps a bit reserved. None would suspect that beneath her carefully maintained routine lay a secret philanthropic life, or the untouched grief that still visited her on quiet nights. "I ran into your neighbor yesterday," Harriet continued, cutting into her salmon. "The nurse. Her son has apparently become quite the rising star at Mass General. Cardiology, I believe. Unusual to see someone from that background reach such heights." Eleanor carefully controlled her expression. "Gloria works extraordinarily hard. Jason inherited her determination." "Indeed. Scholarships can only take one so far. I wonder how they manage the financial burden. Medical school costs are astronomical these days." Harriet had always been perceptive, sometimes uncomfortably so. "Hard work and sacrifice, I imagine," Eleanor replied, steering the conversation toward department politics, a subject guaranteed to distract Harriet from any other line of inquiry. By late afternoon, Eleanor was back in her brownstone, changing from her professional attire into comfortable slacks and a cashmere sweater. Tuesday evenings were reserved for her volunteer work at the local literacy center, teaching English to recent immigrants. The 3-hour session left her tired but fulfilled in a way her academic work sometimes didn't. These students, adults, from El Salvador, Haiti, Vietnam, worked full-time jobs, raised families, and still found energy to master a new language. Their determination reminded her of Gloria's quiet perseverance. Returning home at 9, Eleanor prepared chamomile tea and carried it to her small balcony. The spring evening was cool but not uncomfortable. Below, the neighborhood settled into evening rhythms, lights flickering on in apartments, the occasional dog walker, young professionals returning from late dinners. She spotted Gloria arriving home, moving slowly, the weight of her double shift evident in her posture. Eleanor considered calling down a greeting but hesitated, not wanting to draw attention to the fact that she had been watching. Their relationship was cordial but carefully bounded, never crossing into the intimacy that might lead to questions Eleanor wasn't prepared to answer. Inside, she performed her evening ritual, checking doors and windows, turning off unnecessary lights, reviewing tomorrow's schedule in the leather-bound planner Frank had given her for their last Christmas together. This methodical approach to life had become both her comfort and her limitation, a way of controlling external variables when internal ones remained stubbornly resistant to order. In bed, she allowed herself 15 minutes with Frank's photograph on her nightstand, speaking to him softly about her day, as if continuing a conversation, merely interrupted rather than permanently severed. She never mentioned Jason or the foundation during these one-sided exchanges, though she couldn't have explained why if asked. Perhaps some part of her worried that Frank would disapprove of her attachment to the young man, or worse, would understand it too well, recognize it as the maternal investment they'd both longed to make in children of their own. "Good night, my love," she whispered, placing the frame face down as she did each night before sleep. Eleanor Wilson's life was a masterclass in containment, emotions, expectations, connections all carefully managed within boundaries she herself had established. The privacy she maintained wasn't merely habitual but essential to her sense of self. She had learned, in the years since Frank's death, that controlling what others knew about you was sometimes the only control one had. As she drifted toward sleep, Eleanor couldn't have known that in less than 24 hours, the carefully constructed walls between her compartmentalized worlds would begin to crumble, and the secret she had guarded for 7 years would be rushing toward an unexpected revelation. The pain began subtly, a tightness in Eleanor's chest that she dismissed as indigestion from the cafe's quiche at lunch. By mid-afternoon, as she watered the potted herbs on her rooftop garden, the discomfort had intensified, radiating across her left shoulder and down her arm. Still, she resisted concern, taking 2 antacids and sitting on her garden bench to catch her breath. Boston stretched before her, the Charles River glinting in spring sunshine, Harvard's buildings stately. In the distance, this rooftop sanctuary, with its carefully tended plants and comfortable seating area, was her private oasis. Frank had designed it as their 20th anniversary gift, installing the irrigation system himself despite his failing health. She'd maintained it meticulously since his passing, a living memorial to their shared love of growing things. Eleanor checked her watch, 3:17 p.m. Gloria would be returning from her morning shift soon, perhaps visible on the street below if Eleanor moved to the edge of the roof. This casual observation of the Rodriguez family's comings and goings had become an unconscious part of her routine over the years. Not intrusive surveillance, she assured herself, merely neighborly awareness. As she stood, dizziness swept over her. The watering can clattered to the wooden decking, water pooling around her sensible shoes. The pressure in her chest suddenly transformed into crushing pain, as though her sternum were being compressed in a vice. Eleanor reached for her phone in her cardigan pocket, her fingers unexpectedly clumsy. "Stay calm," she instructed herself aloud, her professor's voice steady despite the alarm rising within her. This is likely nothing serious. But as she attempted to unlock her phone, her left arm became leaden, unresponsive. The screen blurred before her eyes. With growing horror, Eleanor recognized the symptoms from the heart health pamphlet her doctor had reviewed with her at her last checkup. Her knees buckled. As she collapsed onto the bench, a surge of thoughts crowded her mind. The foundation paperwork was not in order. No one would water her herbs. She hadn't graded the graduate papers promised for Friday. Absurdly trivial concerns, mixed with profound ones. Frank's favorite records needed proper archiving. She'd never told Jason that his analysis of To the Lighthouse in 11th grade had been more insightful than most of her undergraduate students. Through sheer determination, Eleanor managed to dial 911, though she couldn't later recall the conversation. She remembered only the dispatcher's calm voice instructing her to remain still, to focus on breathing. Help was coming. Minutes stretched elastically as she waited, consciousness wavering. The blue sky above seemed suddenly precious, intensely beautiful. How strange that ordinary things acquired such significance when one's time might be limited. A sparrow landed on the garden railing, tilting its head curiously at her. Eleanor wanted to tell it something important, but the words dissolved before she could form them. The rooftop door burst open as Gloria Rodriguez rushed through, still in her nurse's aide uniform. "Mrs. Wilson, the building manager called me, said 911 was coming for you." She knelt beside Eleanor, fingers expertly finding the pulse point at her wrist. "Did you take an aspirin? Are you having chest pain?" Eleanor tried to respond, but breathing required all her concentration now. Gloria's face swam in and out of focus as she efficiently loosened Eleanor's collar, positioned her more comfortably on the bench, and spoke reassuringly while casting anxious glances toward the roof access door. "The ambulance is coming up now. You're going to be fine, Mrs. Wilson. Just hold on." The next moments fragmented into disconnected impressions. The young paramedics lifting her onto a stretcher, the jerky journey down in the service elevator, Gloria insisting on accompanying her, the wail of sirens as they moved through Boston traffic, oxygen mask over her face, rhythmic beeping of medical equipment, fluorescent lights racing overhead as she was wheeled through hospital corridors. Words penetrated her semi-consciousness in urgent bursts. Female, 62, cardiac event, BP dropping, need a cardiologist stat. Then a new voice, authoritative despite its youth. "I'll take this one. Get her to Cath Lab 2 immediately." Eleanor forced her eyes open, trying to focus on the source of the voice. A young doctor in blue scrubs was striding alongside her gurney, reviewing the chart a nurse had handed him. His face was partially obscured by a surgical mask, but something in his earnest brown eyes tugged at her memory. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Dr. Rodriguez. You're having a heart attack, but you're in the right place now. We're going to take excellent care of you." The name registered dimly through her pain. Rodriguez. A coincidence, surely. The name was common enough. As consciousness began to slip away again, Eleanor felt the young doctor's hand briefly cover hers. "Stay with us, Mrs. Wilson. We're not losing you today." The certainty in his voice was the last thing Eleanor registered before darkness claimed her completely. She couldn't have known that the doctor now fighting to save her life was the same boy who had once sat in her living room discussing literature, whose medical education she had anonymously funded for 7 years, or that this chance encounter would set in motion the unraveling of her most carefully guarded secret. Eleanor drifted through layers of consciousness, aware first of the persistent beeping of monitors, then of voices murmuring nearby, and finally of the distinctive antiseptic smell of a hospital room. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy as she struggled to open them. "She's coming around," a female voice noted professionally. Dr. Rodriguez said to page him immediately when she wakes. Memory returned in disjointed fragments. The rooftop garden, crushing chest pain, Gloria finding her the ambulance ride. And then, had she imagined it? A young doctor with familiar eyes claiming the name Rodriguez. Eleanor managed to open her eyes, blinking against the muted daylight filtering through vertical blinds. A nurse in patterned scrubs adjusted something on one of the monitors. "Welcome back, Mrs. Wilson. You gave us quite a scare. I'm Nurse Chen. You're in the cardiac care unit at Massachusetts General. Do you remember what happened?" "Heart attack?" Eleanor's voice emerged as a dry whisper. "Yes, a significant one. Dr. Rodriguez performed an emergency procedure yesterday, placed 2 stents in your coronary arteries. You're stable now, but you'll be with us for a few days while we monitor your recovery." Eleanor tried to process this information through the fog of medication. "What time is it?" "Just after 10 in the morning. You've been here about 19 hours. Your neighbor has been in the waiting area most of that time. She's the one who found you, I understand. We can allow her a brief visit once the doctor has examined you." Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened, and a young man in a white coat entered, focused on the tablet in his hands. "Good morning, Mrs. Wilson. I'm glad to see you're awake. I'm Dr. Jason Rodriguez, the cardiology resident who performed your catheterization yesterday." He looked up, and Eleanor found herself staring into a face that represented the intersection of her separate worlds. The boy from across the hall, now a confident medical professional. Recognition flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by professional composure. "Mrs. Wilson, wait, you're that Mrs. Wilson from Marlborough Street, my mother's neighbor?" Eleanor nodded weakly, simultaneously processing the coincidence and calculating its implications. After 7 years of careful anonymity, fate had placed her life literally in the hands of the young man she'd secretly supported. "What a remarkable coincidence," Jason said, recovering quickly and checking the monitors beside her bed. "My mother mentioned you'd had a medical emergency, but I had no idea you were the patient I treated yesterday. Hospital privacy protocols mean we don't always. No patient's identities until afterward." "Your mother," Eleanor began. "She's been here all night, refusing to leave until she knew you were stable. She feels terrible she didn't recognize the symptoms earlier when she found you." "She saved my life," Eleanor managed. "You both did," Eleanor thought, but didn't say aloud. Jason continued explaining her condition: occluded arteries, the stenting procedure, recovery protocols. His manner shifting seamlessly between the neighbor she'd known distantly for years and the confident medical professional he'd become. Eleanor listened, noting how his hands gestured in exactly the same way they had when, as a teenager, he'd enthusiastically explained plot points from novels she'd lent him. "Do you have any questions about your treatment or prognosis?" he concluded. Several arose immediately in Eleanor's mind, none of which were medical. Did he know about the foundation? Had he ever suspected? Would this chance encounter force a revelation she'd never intended to make? Instead, she asked, "How long until I can return home?" "At least 3 days. possibly longer depending on your progress. And you'll need in-home assistance for the first couple of weeks after discharge. Is there someone who can stay with you? Family members, perhaps? The question highlighted the fundamental aloneness of Eleanor's existence. No immediate family, she answered, suddenly conscious of how her carefully constructed independence now represented a practical liability. My mother mentioned that, Jason said, making a note in her chart. We'll have social services discuss options with you, possibly a home health aide or temporary care facility. That won't be necessary, came Gloria Rodriguez's voice from the doorway. She stood there in fresh scrubs, apparently having come directly from her shift. Mrs. Wilson can recover at our place. Jason's old room is empty now that he has his own apartment, and I'm a certified aide. I know exactly what post-cardiac care requires. Eleanor started to protest, but Gloria continued, approaching the bed with the quiet determination that characterized everything she did. You've been a good neighbor to us for years, Mrs. Wilson. Let us help you now. The irony of the situation was not lost on Eleanor. For 7 years, she had anonymously supported this family from a careful distance, and now they were offering support she couldn't gracefully decline without explanation. Jason looked between the two women, professional assessment evident in his gaze. That would be an excellent arrangement from a medical perspective if Mrs. Wilson is comfortable with it. Both Rodriguezes looked at Eleanor expectantly, waiting for her response. The walls between her compartmentalized worlds were collapsing faster than she could reinforce them. I wouldn't want to impose, she began weakly. It's not an imposition, Gloria insisted. It's what neighbors do for each other. As Eleanor contemplated the complex web of connections and secrets about to entangle them all, Jason's pager beeped. I'm needed in the cath lab. I'll check on you later, Mrs. Wilson. He paused at the door. And if you're enjoying this story of remarkable coincidence and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to ensure you don't miss the next episode of life's amazing twists of fate. After he left, Gloria pulled a chair closer to Eleanor's bed. Jason doesn't know it yet, but you being his patient is more than coincidence. It's providence. She patted Eleanor's hand with genuine affection. Rest now. We'll sort everything out later. As Gloria adjusted her blankets with professional efficiency mixed with personal care, Eleanor realized that the carefully constructed boundaries of her life had not merely been breached, they had been obliterated. The next few weeks would either force a complete revelation of her secret philanthropy or require even more elaborate deception. Neither prospect seemed manageable in her weakened state. Closing her eyes, Eleanor surrendered temporarily to circumstance. The heart monitor's steady beeping reminded her that whatever complications lay ahead, at least she was alive to face them, thanks to the very young man whose future she had quietly secured, now securing hers in return. 3 days later, Eleanor sat on the edge of her hospital bed, dressed in clothes Gloria had brought from her apartment, waiting for discharge paperwork. Despite her protests, arrangements had been finalized. She would spend 2 weeks recovering in Jason's childhood bedroom in the Rodriguez apartment. The wheelchair is just hospital policy, Nurse Chen explained, entering with the promised conveyance. Dr. Rodriguez has already signed your discharge orders, and your neighbor is at the front desk completing the paperwork. Eleanor smoothed her cardigan, an action more about composing herself than addressing wrinkles. After 15 years of careful self-sufficiency, the prospect of dependency, particularly on the very family she'd secretly benefited, created a profound discomfort she struggled to articulate even to herself. You're very fortunate, Nurse Chen continued, helping Eleanor into the wheelchair. Having a healthcare professional as your caregiver is ideal for cardiac recovery, and Dr. Rodriguez has arranged to be your outpatient physician, taking a personal interest in your case. Yes, very fortunate, Eleanor echoed, the irony of the situation not lost on her. As they wheeled through corridors toward the hospital exit, Eleanor mentally cataloged the challenges awaiting her. Beyond the physical recovery, which Dr. Feldman, her primary physician who had visited yesterday, described as promising but requiring vigilance, lay the more complex navigation of her unexpected proximity to the Rodriguez family. Gloria waited at the hospital entrance beside her 10-year-old Corolla, smiling with genuine warmth. "Everything's ready at home, Mrs. Wilson. I've prepared Jason's room with fresh linens, moved in a comfortable reading chair from our living room, and stocked your favorite tea." The drive to Marlborough Street was filled with Gloria's gentle chatter about neighborhood happenings, interspersed with reassurances about the recovery process. Eleanor answered appropriately, while gazing out the window, noting how different the familiar route looked from the passenger seat, instead of from behind the wheel of her own sensible Volvo, or from her customary seat on the MBTA. "We'll stop at your apartment first, so you can collect anything specific you need," Gloria explained as they parked. "Jason is meeting us there. He insisted on helping review your medications and ensuring your place is secured properly while you're away." Eleanor's apartment, her private sanctuary for decades, suddenly felt vulnerable to inspection. What if they noticed the foundation paperwork in her desk, or the file of newspaper clippings tracking Jason's academic achievements? Her anxiety spiked, registering on her portable heart monitor with a series of rapid beeps. "Deep breaths," Gloria instructed professionally, helping Eleanor from the car. "Remember what they told you about managing stress." Jason was waiting in the building lobby, changed from hospital attire into jeans and a Harvard Medical School sweatshirt that made him look younger than his 30 years. "Mrs. Wilson, good to see you vertical." He greeted her with the particular blend of warmth and clinical assessment that characterized his interactions since her heart attack. "I've prepared a list," Eleanor said, extracting a neatly written inventory from her purse. "If you wouldn't mind gathering these items while I rest a moment." Jason studied the list: clothing, toiletries, current reading materials, her planner, specific medications from the bathroom cabinet, all carefully selected to reveal nothing of consequence. "Of course, Mom can help you get settled in the living room while I collect these." Gloria guided Eleanor to her familiar armchair while Jason disappeared into the bedroom with an empty overnight bag. Left alone briefly when Gloria went to make tea, Eleanor found herself calculating how to protect her privacy during this unexpected arrangement. The Foundation's quarterly transfer to Harvard's financial aid office was scheduled for next week. She would need to find a way to make the call privately. "Your apartment is just as I remembered," Jason commented, returning with the packed bag. "I always loved those bookshelves. Remember when you let me borrow your collection of Hemingway in high school? That's when I decided I wanted to create a personal library someday." Eleanor nodded, uncomfortable with these reminiscences that highlighted the connection she'd worked to keep at appropriate distance. "You were always an avid reader." "Medical texts have dominated recently, but I'm trying to get back to literature. Actually, there's a first edition of The Old Man and the Sea at that bookshop on Charles Street. Been saving up to treat myself when residency ends." Eleanor knew the precise edition he meant, had considered purchasing it for him as a graduation gift before deciding such a personal gesture might raise questions. "A worthy aspiration," she replied non-committally. The next hour passed in careful choreography as they transferred Eleanor across the hall to the Rodriguez apartment. Despite its familiar exterior, Eleanor had been inside only a handful of times over the years, deliberately maintaining the polite distance of neighborly acquaintance rather than friendship. The apartment was smaller than hers, warm with lived-in comfort rather than curated elegance. Family photographs crowded available surfaces: Gloria in her nurse's aide graduation ceremony, Jason in academic regalia at various graduations, an older man who must be Gloria's father sitting on a porch somewhere rural. Jason's childhood bedroom had been transformed into a quasi-medical recovery room. A bedside table held neatly arranged medication bottles, a blood pressure monitor, and a notebook for tracking vital signs. Medical precision merged with homey touches: fresh flowers on the dresser, a crocheted afghan across the foot of the bed. The bathroom is just across the hall, Gloria explained, setting Eleanor's bag on a chair. I've put a shower chair in there and non-slip mats. Jason insists. We maintain hospital-level safety protocols. I appreciate all this effort, Eleanor said, suddenly overwhelmed by the genuine care evident in their preparations. Care she hadn't experienced since Frank's death and hadn't allowed herself to need. It's the least we can do, Gloria replied, simply. Now, your first medication dose is due at 4. Would you like to rest until then, or join me in the living room for a while? The question was innocuous, but represented the first of countless small decisions that would define this new arrangement. Eleanor's instinct was to retreat, to maintain whatever separation she could, but she recognized that strategy would only raise questions over the coming days. Perhaps the living room, if you don't mind. I've spent enough time in bed these past few days. As Gloria helped her settle on the sofa, Eleanor caught sight of a framed document, partially visible behind a family photo on the mantel. Even from this distance, she recognized the letterhead of her foundation. Her heart monitor beeped a warning as she realized just how precarious her secret had become. By the end of her first week in the Rodriguez apartment, Eleanor had settled into an unexpected routine. Mornings began with Gloria checking her vitals before leaving for work, followed by quiet hours of reading or watching the news. Jason visited daily, sometimes for formal medical checkups, other times just briefly between hospital shifts, always with the dual attention of physician and family friend. Your numbers are improving steadily, he noted on Friday afternoon, reviewing the log Gloria meticulously maintained. How are you feeling about taking a short walk today? Just down the hallway and back, nothing strenuous. Eleanor closed her book, a collection of Mary Oliver poetry she'd found on Jason's bookshelf, surprised by their shared taste. I believe I'm ready for that challenge, Doctor. A slight smile crossed his face at her formal address. Their interactions maintained this curious blend of familiarity and distance, neither acknowledging the strangeness of their situation, nor fully embracing their previous neighborly relationship. As they walked slowly down the hallway, Jason matching his pace to her careful steps, Eleanor found herself studying his profile. The boy she had observed growing up had become a man with her husband's compassionate eyes and her own precise attention to detail. The thought startled her. This unconscious adoption of the young man into an imagined lineage. You seem pensive today, Jason observed, medical training making him attentive to subtle shifts in demeanor. Eleanor considered deflecting, as was her habit when conversations threatened to become too personal. But something about the earnest concern in his expression made her respond honestly. I was thinking about time, how quickly it passes. It seems just yesterday you were a teenager borrowing books from my library. Jason smiled. Those books changed my life, you know. Especially that collection of medical biographies you lent me in junior year. Before that, I was interested in medicine, but reading about William Osler and Elizabeth Blackwell, it made the dream feel possible. Eleanor remembered the book well. One she'd specifically purchased with him in mind after overhearing him discuss career aspirations with Gloria, another small, anonymous investment in his future. You were always determined, she said carefully, even as a boy. Mom says I was born stubborn. He chuckled, supporting her elbow as they turned back toward the apartment. Speaking of Mom, she mentioned you've been helping her with English composition for her nursing advancement courses. She's been trying to move up to LPN for years. Eleanor had indeed found herself assisting Gloria with coursework in the evenings, an organic development that arose from their proximity and Eleanor's instinctive educator's response to the younger woman's struggles with technical writing. Your mother is intelligent and dedicated. Her challenges with writing are merely technical, not intellectual. That's exactly what she needed to hear, Jason said, his voice warming. Growing up, she always doubted her academic abilities. The aide position was meant to be temporary while she pursued nursing, but life kept getting in the way. As they reached the apartment door, Eleanor felt a strange lightness. This simple conversation represented the longest personal exchange she'd had with Jason in years, perhaps ever. The barriers she'd maintained were softening, not through any dramatic revelation, but through these small moments of genuine connection. Inside, Jason guided her to the kitchen rather than back to her room. "I thought we might have tea before I head to my shift. There's something I wanted to discuss with you." Eleanor's pulse quickened as she sat at the small kitchen table. Had he discovered something? The foundation paperwork? The tracked payments? Jason placed a mug of Earl Grey before her, prepared exactly as she liked it, she noted with surprise. He'd been paying attention. "I've been thinking about your living situation," he began, sitting across from her. "After your recovery, I mean." "I'll be perfectly capable of returning to my apartment," Eleanor said quickly. "Of course you will. But your cardiac event was significant. Having someone nearby, someone who could check on you regularly, would be medically advisable." Eleanor sipped her tea, waiting for him to continue. "Mom mentioned that your spare bedroom has been unused since your husband passed. She's been looking for a place closer to the hospital for her nursing courses, and the commute from here is becoming unsustainable with her schedule." The implication became clear, a proposal for Gloria to become Eleanor's tenant. "I couldn't possibly charge your mother rent," Eleanor responded automatically. Jason shook his head. "That's not what I'm suggesting. Mom would insist on paying fair market value. She's fiercely independent that way, but it would be a mutually beneficial arrangement. She'd be closer to work and school, and you'd have someone checking in regularly during your ongoing recovery." The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. For years, she'd maintained careful distance from this family, while anonymously supporting them financially. Now fate seemed determined to entangle their lives more directly than she'd ever intended. "It's just an idea to consider," Jason added, misinterpreting her silence as reluctance. "No pressure at all." Eleanor found herself nodding slowly. "I'll think about it. It's certainly a practical suggestion." Jason's pager beeped. "I need to head to the hospital. We'll talk more later?" He squeezed her shoulder gently before gathering his coat and medical bag. After he left, Eleanor remained at the kitchen table, the apartment suddenly quiet, except for the ticking of a wall clock. Her gaze wandered to the living room, where family photos chronicled Jason's journey. Elementary school concerts, high school graduation, college commencement, medical school white coat ceremony, a life she had helped shape from the shadows. On the side table near these photos sat a framed certificate partially visible from her vantage point, the scholarship acknowledgement she'd recognized earlier that week. Eleanor had designed the foundation's paperwork to be deliberately generic, providing financial support without revealing its source. She rose carefully and moved to examine it more closely. The certificate was displayed prominently alongside Jason's most significant achievements, clearly a source of pride and gratitude. The Eleanor and Franklin Wilson Educational Trust, it read in elegant script, recognizes the exceptional academic promise of Jason Rodriguez with a full medical education scholarship. Seeing the foundation's name displayed so openly in the Rodriguez home brought a tightness to Eleanor's chest that had nothing to do with her heart condition. All these years, her secret benefaction had held honored space in their lives, while she remained the cordial but distant neighbor across the hall. "He keeps it as a reminder," Gloria's voice came from behind her. Eleanor turned to find the younger woman in the doorway, having returned home unexpectedly. Jason applied for over 50 scholarships his senior year. That one came through when we'd almost given up hope. He says it's a reminder that miracles happen when you least expect them. Eleanor swallowed hard, unsure how to respond without revealing too much. "An aptly named foundation," she finally managed, referencing the coincidence of her first name appearing on the document. Gloria smiled. "I've always thought so too, like it was meant specifically for him." She hung her coat by the door. "I left my textbook this morning. Have to get back for an evening shift, but Jason texted that you two had a good walk today." "Yes, quite successful," Eleanor replied, returning carefully to her seat at the kitchen table. Your son mentioned an interesting housing proposal. Gloria's expression brightened. He told you? I've been wanting to ask but didn't want to impose. The commute is killing me, and the thought of being closer to school. She paused. But please don't feel any obligation. We want what's best for your recovery. Something in Gloria's earnest expression, so like her son's, broke through a barrier Eleanor had maintained for 15 years. This woman had opened her home without hesitation, had arranged her work schedule to provide care, had shared her family space with someone who had deliberately remained at arm's length. I think it might be an excellent arrangement, Eleanor heard herself saying. The apartment has been too quiet since Frank passed. Perhaps it's time for a change. Gloria's smile was radiant. Really? That would be amazing. We could try it temporarily at first, see how it works for both of us. As Gloria excitedly discussed logistics, Eleanor experienced a curious sensation, like puzzle pieces shifting into a new configuration. The carefully separated compartments of her life were realigning, creating an unexpected picture. For years, she had found purpose in her secret philanthropy, satisfaction in the distance it maintained. Now that distance was collapsing, forcing her to confront the possibility of more direct connection. What began as a medical emergency was evolving into something more complex and potentially more meaningful. Eleanor wasn't prepared for the revelation of her secret. That decision still loomed uncomfortably. But she found herself increasingly unable to maintain the emotional barriers that had defined her life since Frank's death. As Gloria departed again for her evening shift, Eleanor returned to Jason's childhood bedroom, now her temporary sanctuary. On the nightstand sat a photograph she hadn't noticed before, a much younger Jason in graduation cap and gown, arm around Gloria, both beaming with pride. Behind them, partially blurred but recognizable, stood Eleanor herself, a peripheral figure at the high school ceremony she'd attended out of neighborly obligation. She had been there all along, Eleanor realized, present in the margins of their lives just as they had been in hers. The difference was that she had always known the significance of their connection, while they remained unaware of the invisible threads binding them together. For the first time since her heart attack, Eleanor felt fear that had nothing to do with her physical condition. These new connections forming between her and the Rodriguez family were leading inexorably toward a truth she had never intended to reveal. How would they react when they discovered her secret role in their lives? Would gratitude overshadow betrayal, or would her anonymous generosity be reinterpreted as patronizing interference? Eleanor had no answers as she settled into the borrowed bed, surrounded by the remnants of Jason's childhood. Medical school pennants, science fair trophies, and bookshelves lined with volumes she had subtly recommended over the years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities for revelation or continued concealment. For tonight, she simply allowed herself to acknowledge what she had denied for 7 years. These people mattered to her, not just as beneficiaries of her philanthropy, but as individuals whose lives had become quietly essential to her own. The second week of Eleanor's stay with the Rodriguez family brought subtle but significant shifts in the household dynamic. Gloria had begun bringing home nursing school applications, spreading them across the kitchen table in the evenings as Eleanor offered guidance on personal statements and prerequisite requirements. These sessions, initially awkward, had evolved into genuinely enjoyable conversations that often extended beyond academic concerns into personal histories and shared experiences. I never told anyone this, Gloria confided one evening, but I was accepted to nursing school 20 years ago, right before I discovered I was pregnant, with Jason. My parents were traditional, believed mothers should stay home with their children. When Jason's father left, they offered support, but only if I focused on proper motherhood instead of selfish ambitions. Eleanor, who had imagined various scenarios about Jason's absent father over the years but never dared ask, found herself unexpectedly trusted with these private details. That must have been an impossible choice, she responded, careful to keep judgment from her voice. Gloria's smile held both sadness and pride. Not impossible, Jason was worth every sacrifice. But now it's finally my turn, though sometimes I wonder if I'm too old to start over. Nonsense, Eleanor said with the firm certainty of a former professor. My most dedicated students were often those returning to education after life experience. You've been practicing practical nursing skills for years. Now you'll simply formalize that knowledge. These conversations represented a fundamental shift in Eleanor's worldview. For decades, she had maintained careful boundaries with others, offering financial support from a safe distance rather than emotional connection. The heart attack had forced her into proximity that made such distance impossible, and she found herself increasingly uncomfortable with her long-maintained secrets. Jason's daily visits continued, moving gradually from primarily medical checkups to longer conversations. On Thursday afternoon, he arrived with a small paper bag from the bookstore on Charles Street. "A recovery gift," he explained, handing it to Eleanor with a slightly embarrassed smile. "It's not much." Inside was a hardbound journal with a marbled cover reminiscent of antique books and a fountain pen. "Mom mentioned you've been helping with her writing, and I remembered how you always carried a notebook when I was growing up. Your marginalia in the books you lent me was often more educational than my actual English classes." Eleanor ran her fingers over the journal's textured cover, unexpectedly moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "This is lovely, Jason. Thank you." "Actually, it's somewhat selfishly motivated," he admitted, sitting across from her. "I was hoping you might consider recording some of your teaching methods. Mom says you've shown her approaches to reading comprehension that none of her other instructors have used." Eleanor looked up, surprised. "For your mother's benefit?" "Partly," Jason nodded. "But also because I've been invited to teach a medical communication course for first-year residents next semester. Explaining complex medical concepts to patients from diverse educational backgrounds is something many doctors struggle with. Your background in literature education offers a different perspective on communication." The request represented a peculiar reversal in their relationship. Jason seeking her professional expertise rather than her functioning solely as his benefactor or patient. "I'd be happy to share some thoughts," Eleanor found herself saying, though teaching methodology was far from what she had expected to discuss during her medical recovery. That evening, alone in Jason's childhood bedroom, Eleanor opened the journal and began writing. What started as notes on educational theory quickly evolved into more personal reflections about her changing circumstances and the unexpected connections forming with the Rodriguez family. "For 15 years, I have defined myself by absence," she wrote, the fountain pen flowing smoothly across the page. "Frank's absence, the absence of the children we never had. I filled these absences with structured routine and distant philanthropy. Now circumstances have forced proximity, and I find these absences being filled instead with actual human connection. It is terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure." The journal became a nightly ritual over the following days, a private space to process the internal transformation occurring alongside her physical recovery. Eleanor found herself critically examining the choices that had led her to such isolation, recognizing how grief over Frank's death and their childlessness had calcified into emotional withdrawal. On Sunday morning, exactly 2 weeks after her heart attack, Eleanor woke early. The apartment was quiet, Gloria having left for an overnight shift at the care facility. Moving carefully, Eleanor made her way to the kitchen to prepare tea, feeling stronger than she had since the hospital. As water heated on the stove, she noticed an envelope on the counter with her name written in Jason's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a brief note. "Mrs. Wilson, early shift today, but wanted to let you know your latest tests look excellent. Dr. Feldman agrees you can return to your apartment tomorrow if you feel ready. We'll discuss follow-up care this evening. J." Eleanor stared at the note, experiencing an unexpected pang at the prospect of returning to her own space. After years of carefully maintained solitude, the thought of her empty apartment no longer represented comforting independence, but rather a return to isolation. The realization was profound. Her heart attack hadn't just physically endangered her life. It had cracked open the careful shell she'd constructed around her emotional existence. The machinery of her daily routine, once a comfort, now seemed hollow compared to the genuine human connections she'd formed during her recovery. As she sipped her tea by the kitchen window, Eleanor watched the city awakening below. Sunday morning joggers, early churchgoers, couples walking hand in hand. For years, she had observed life from a distance, her anonymous philanthropy allowing her to participate without vulnerability. Now, having experienced the warmth of direct connection with the Rodriguez family, she found herself questioning whether such distance had truly been protective or merely limiting. The journal Jason had given her lay on the table. Eleanor opened it, recording this latest revelation. Perhaps the greatest risk to my heart has not been physical, but the deliberate withholding of genuine connection. Frank would be disappointed in how I've withdrawn from life in his absence. He always believed our capacity for love expanded with use, rather than being a finite resource to be carefully rationed. As she wrote these words, Eleanor acknowledged a truth she had been approaching gradually over the past 2 weeks. The secret foundation through which she had supported Jason's education needed to be revealed. Not immediately, perhaps, but continuing the deception felt increasingly at odds with the authentic relationship developing between them. The decision brought both anxiety and relief. After 7 years of anonymous giving, the prospect of having her generosity known was terrifying. Would it change how the Rodriguez family saw her? Would they resent the secrecy, the implicit power imbalance? Or would the revelation strengthen the genuine connection forming between them? Eleanor had no answers as she closed the journal, but for the first time in 15 years, she was willing to risk finding out. Monday morning brought Eleanor back to her own apartment, the familiar space feeling simultaneously comfortable and strangely empty after 2 weeks in the Rodriguez household. Jason had insisted on wheeling her belongings across the hall himself, conducting a final medical check before reluctantly departing for his hospital shift. Mom will stop by after work, he'd reminded her, and I've programmed both our numbers. On speed dial on your phone. Dr. Feldman wants to see you Thursday, and I've arranged to be off that day to drive you. Eleanor had assured him she was perfectly capable of managing, though privately she appreciated these continued connections. They had agreed that Gloria would move into the spare bedroom the following weekend, an arrangement that now felt right despite its departure from Eleanor's carefully maintained independence. Alone for the first time since her heart attack, Eleanor moved slowly through her apartment, reacquainting herself with her space. Everything was exactly as she had left it, yet somehow different, as though her changed perspective had altered the physical environment itself. In her study, the foundation paperwork remained locked in the bottom drawer of her desk. Eleanor sat in her chair, considering the decision she'd gradually reached during her recovery. It was time to reveal her role in Jason's education. Not immediately. The timing would need to be carefully chosen, but soon. The doorbell interrupted her contemplation. Checking her watch, Eleanor noted it was barely noon, too early for Gloria's visit after her shift. Through the peephole, she was surprised to see Harriet Lowell, her colleague from the university, holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. "Eleanor, thank God!" Harriet exclaimed when the door opened. "I've been calling for weeks with no answer. The department said you were on medical leave, but no details. I had to badger poor Martin in faculty affairs to get any information at all." Eleanor ushered her friend inside, explaining the heart attack and subsequent recovery with the same factual precision she'd always applied to difficult topics. Staying. "With neighbors? You?" Harriet's surprise was evident as she settled on the sofa, placing the casserole on the coffee table. "You've barely mentioned these people in 15 years, and suddenly they're your caretakers." "The Rodriguez family has been extraordinarily kind," Eleanor replied, somewhat defensively. "Gloria is a healthcare worker, which made the arrangement particularly appropriate." Harriet's expression remained skeptical. "And the son? Martin mentioned something about him being your doctor, by remarkable coincidence." Jason has recently completed his cardiology residency at Mass General. He happened to be on duty when I was admitted. Happened to be on duty, Harriet repeated, emphasizing the coincidence. Eleanor, you know I don't believe in fate or divine intervention, but even I must admit that's extraordinary timing. The conversation shifted to department gossip and Harriet's recent research, but Eleanor remained distracted. Her friend's evident surprise at the connection with the Rodriguez family highlighted just how carefully Eleanor had compartmentalized her life, how thoroughly she had prevented anyone from knowing about her foundation or her interest in Jason's career. After Harriet departed with promises to visit again soon, Eleanor found herself drawn back to her study. The quarterly transfer to Harvard's financial aid office was scheduled for tomorrow, the last payment of Jason's medical education since he'd completed his residency. This final transaction seemed symbolic, a conclusion to her 7 years of anonymous support. With renewed purpose, Eleanor unlocked the desk drawer and removed the foundation documents, spreading them across the desktop. The arrangement had been elegantly simple. A private foundation established with a portion of Frank's life insurance proceeds, its sole purpose to provide an anonymous full scholarship to a designated recipient. Her financial advisor and lawyer were the only people who knew of its existence, both bound by professional confidentiality. As Eleanor reviewed the paperwork, a detail caught her attention, one she had forgotten in the years of routine payments. The foundation's bylaws, drafted hastily when Jason had first received his medical school acceptance, included a specific clause. Upon completion of the recipient's education, all foundation records would be sealed for 25 years, after which they would be transferred to Harvard's university archives as part of a larger bequest from the Wilson estate. The implication suddenly struck Eleanor with full force. If she proceeded with her plan to reveal herself as Jason's benefactor, she would be legally breaching the foundation's confidentiality provisions she herself had insisted upon to ensure her anonymity would remain protected even after her death. More concerning, such a breach could potentially impact the tax status of her donations retroactively. The foundation had been carefully structured by her lawyer to comply with specific charitable giving regulations. Revealing herself as the donor now could raise complex legal and financial questions. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, this unexpected complication forcing her to reconsider her emerging plan. The practical obstacles to revelation were significant, but so too was her growing conviction that continuing the deception was untenable, given the evolving relationship with the Rodriguez family. The doorbell rang again, interrupting her troubled contemplation. This time, it was Gloria, arriving as promised after her shift, carrying a small bag of groceries. "Hope you don't mind," she said, moving comfortably toward the kitchen. "Thought I'd prepare dinner before getting you settled. Jason says you need to maintain heart-healthy nutrition even back in your own space." Eleanor followed her, the legal documents left spread across her desk, the complication they represented temporarily set aside but not resolved. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness," she replied, watching as Gloria efficiently unpacked vegetables and began washing them at the sink. Already at home in a kitchen she had never before entered. "I spoke with my landlord today," Gloria mentioned, chopping carrots with practiced precision. "He's agreed to let me out of my lease early, since I explained it was for medical caregiving purposes. I can move in this weekend if that still works for you." The casual domesticity of the moment, Gloria in her kitchen, discussing shared living arrangements, contrasted sharply with the legal documents in Eleanor's study. The distance she had maintained for years was collapsing rapidly, while the means to maintain that distance grew increasingly complex. "This weekend would be perfect," Eleanor heard herself reply, even as her mind grappled with the mounting contradictions of her situation. As they prepared dinner together, Eleanor found herself studying Gloria surreptitiously, this woman whose son she had supported anonymously for 7 years, whose life had been invisibly intertwined with her own. Soon they would be sharing living space, their lives overlapping in ways Eleanor had never anticipated. And somewhere in that future proximity lay an inevitable moment of truth that seemed simultaneously essential and impossible. The complication Eleanor faced was no longer merely legal or financial. It had become deeply personal, a test of her capacity to embrace authentic connection after years of careful distance. The heart attack had forced her to recognize her physical vulnerability. Now she faced the more terrifying prospect of emotional vulnerability as well. 3 days after returning to her apartment, Eleanor sat in Dr. Feldman's waiting room with Jason beside her. Their relationship had settled into an unusual hybrid. He was simultaneously her neighbor, her caretaker, her doctor by proxy, and unknowingly, the beneficiary of her philanthropy. The cognitive dissonance of these overlapping roles increased daily. "Nervous?" Jason asked, noticing her fidgeting with her handbag. "Merely anxious to receive a positive report," Eleanor replied. In truth, her anxiety had little to do with her medical status and everything to do with the decision she'd reached the previous night after hours of deliberation. "Mrs. Wilson?" The nurse appeared at the doorway. "Dr. Feldman can see you now." "Would you like me to join you?" Jason offered. "As your cardiologist, I could—" "That won't be necessary," Eleanor interrupted, perhaps too quickly. "But thank you. The examination was thorough, but encouraging." Dr. Feldman, who had been Eleanor's primary physician for over a decade, seemed genuinely pleased with her recovery progress. "The procedure Dr. Rodriguez performed was textbook perfect," he noted, reviewing her charts. "You're quite fortunate he was on duty that day, one of our most promising young cardiologists." "Yes, quite fortunate," Eleanor agreed, the phrase carrying layers of meaning her doctor couldn't possibly understand. When the examination concluded, Dr. Feldman removed his glasses and fixed Eleanor with the direct gaze that had characterized their relationship for years. "Physically, you're recovering well, but I sense something's troubling you, Eleanor. Depression is not uncommon after cardiac events." Eleanor considered deflecting, as was her habit with personal matters. Instead, she found herself asking, "Have you ever kept a secret so long that revealing it seems more damaging than maintaining it?" The doctor leaned back in his chair, considering. "Is this about your foundation work?" Eleanor stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Frank mentioned it before he passed," Dr. Feldman explained gently. "Not in detail, just that you were establishing something to support deserving students. Doctor-patient confidentiality has kept me from raising it, but since you've opened the door..." The revelation that Frank had shared even this much about their private financial decisions was startling. Frank had always respected Eleanor's desire for privacy in their philanthropy. "It's become complicated," Eleanor admitted. "The recipient of the foundation's support is someone who has unexpectedly become part of my life. Revealing the truth now could damage a relationship I've come to value." Dr. Feldman nodded thoughtfully. "Secrets have power, Eleanor. But in my experience, that power usually diminishes with revelation. It's the keeping that consumes energy." Eleanor left the office with a clean bill of health and a growing resolution. In the waiting room, Jason looked up from his medical journal, smiling as she approached. "Good news, I hope." "Dr. Feldman is pleased with my progress. I'm to continue current medications and begin a supervised exercise program next week." Jason's evident relief humanized him further in Eleanor's eyes, this brilliant young doctor still concerned about his neighbor's recovery. "That's excellent. We should celebrate. Perhaps dinner at that Italian place on Newberry you've mentioned." The invitation was casual but represented another step in their evolving relationship, a social engagement beyond medical necessity or neighborly obligation. Eleanor found herself accepting before fully considering the implications. That evening, seated across from Jason at a corner table in the small restaurant, Eleanor was struck by how naturally their conversation flowed, freed from the constraints of her apartment or medical settings. Jason spoke about his hopes for his career, his interest in preventive cardiology, his desire to work with underserved communities. "Growing up with limited resources changes your perspective on healthcare," he explained. "Mom delayed treatment for her own health issues repeatedly because of cost concerns. That's part of why I'm so passionate about equitable access." Eleanor nodded, thinking of the foundation transfers she had made over the years. Significant, but ultimately just financial. Assistance, nothing that addressed the systemic issues Jason was describing. "You've never asked about your scholarship," she said suddenly, the words emerging before she could reconsider. "The one that funded your medical education." Jason looked, surprised by the change in topic. "The Wilson Trust? I've always been curious, of course. It came through when I'd almost given up hope of attending Harvard. No application process, no interview. Just a letter saying I'd been selected based on academic merit and personal circumstances." Eleanor's heart raced as the moment of decision approached. She could redirect the conversation now, maintain the secret a while longer, perhaps indefinitely, or she could step irrevocably into truth. "The Eleanor and Franklin Wilson Educational Trust," she said carefully, watching his expression. "Named for my husband and myself." Confusion flickered across Jason's face, followed by dawning comprehension. "Wait, you're saying—" He stopped, staring at her. "That's not possible. It's just a coincidence of names." "It's not a coincidence, Jason." Eleanor's voice remained steady despite her internal turmoil. "I established the foundation after Frank's death. The medical biographies, the literary discussions, the careful attention to your academic progress. Those weren't random interactions." Jason's expression shifted through disbelief, confusion, and the beginnings of something Eleanor couldn't quite identify. "You're telling me you secretly paid for my entire medical education? Why? And why tell me now?" The questions hung between them, the restaurant's ambient noise fading as Eleanor faced the decisive moment she had both sought and feared. There would be no returning from this revelation, their relationship forever altered by this truth. "Because I've come to realize that authentic connection requires honesty," she replied, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "And because my heart attack has forced me to reconsider what truly matters in the time I have left." Jason leaned back in his chair, absorbing the magnitude of her revelation. The moment stretched between them, filled with potential for rejection, gratitude, anger, connection, all possibilities hanging in perfect, terrifying balance. Then he reached across the table and covered her clasped hands with his own. "I think," he said quietly, "we have a lot to talk about." In that simple touch and statement, Eleanor recognized that while she couldn't predict the outcome of her revelation, she had irrevocably chosen authentic connection over comfortable distance. Whatever came next would unfold in the light of truth, rather than the shadow of secrecy. The restaurant seemed to fade around them as Jason processed Eleanor's revelation. His face displayed a rapid succession of emotions: shock, disbelief, confusion, and others Eleanor couldn't quite identify. For several long moments, neither spoke, the weight of 7 years of secrecy hanging between them. "I don't understand," Jason finally said, his voice quiet but intense. "You've lived across the hall my entire life. Why would you do this? Why anonymously?" Eleanor took a steadying breath, organizing thoughts she'd rehearsed countless times but never expected to. "Actually, voice. When Frank and I married, we planned to have children," she began. 3 miscarriages later, we accepted it wasn't meant to be. Frank threw himself into his career, I into my teaching. We discussed adoption, but somehow the timing never seemed right. And eventually, the discussion stopped. She paused, sipping water to calm herself. "When Frank died, I found myself with substantial financial resources and no heir. The foundation was initially just a tax strategy my financial advisor suggested. But then I needed to select a recipient." Jason leaned forward slightly. "And you chose me. Why?" "Do you remember the storm that knocked out power to our building when you were 16? Eleanor asked. "You were studying for your AP exams by candlelight in the hallway because your apartment was too dark." Jason nodded slowly. "You invited me to use your dining room table. You had a generator. You brought your physics textbook and 3 novels, extra. Reading, you'd assigned yourself beyond the curriculum. We talked about Steinbeck and particle physics in the same conversation. Eleanor smiled at the memory. In that moment, I saw such extraordinary potential, such hunger for knowledge, despite your circumstances. So it was charity, Jason said, his tone unreadable. No, Eleanor replied firmly. It was investment, in the most promising individual I knew, regardless of circumstance. The anonymity was, she hesitated, partly my nature. I've never been comfortable with recognition. But it was also about dignity. I didn't want our relationship defined by financial obligation. Jason was silent again, processing. When he finally spoke, his question caught Eleanor completely off guard. Did my mother know? No one knew, Eleanor assured him. Only my financial advisor and attorney, both bound by confidentiality. Jason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Eleanor recognized from his teenage years when wrestling with complex problems. For 7 years, you've been secretly funding my education, watching my progress from a distance, all while maintaining this neighborly acquaintance facade. Put that way, her actions sounded more calculated than Eleanor had ever considered them. I never intended, and then by some cosmic coincidence, I end up being the doctor who saves your life, Jason continued, shaking his head in disbelief. Do you have any idea how extraordinary that is? Statistically speaking, it's practically impossible. Eleanor hadn't anticipated this response. I've had ample time to consider the coincidence. Not coincidence, Jason corrected. Full circle. You saved my future, and I saved your life. It's so perfectly balanced it feels almost scripted. He fell silent again, and Eleanor found herself unable to read his thoughts. Was he angry? Grateful? Disturbed by the revelation? His professional demeanor, cultivated through years of medical training, made his true reaction difficult to discern. Finally, Jason asked, "Why tell me now? You could have maintained the secret indefinitely." It was the question Eleanor had asked herself repeatedly over the past week. My heart attack changed my perspective, she said slowly. For 15 years since Frank's death, I've existed at a distance from genuine connection. The foundation allowed me to make a difference without vulnerability. But these past weeks with your family, with you, have shown me how empty that approach has been. Jason nodded, something in his expression softening. I understand distance as protection. After my first year of residency, I nearly quit medicine altogether. Losing a 19-year-old patient devastated me. I considered switching to research. No. Direct patient contact. No emotional investment. This was news to Eleanor. What changed your mind? My attending physician said something I've never forgotten. Protecting yourself from pain means cutting yourself off from purpose. I realized distance might feel safer, but it ultimately diminishes life. The parallel to Eleanor's own journey was unmistakable, and she felt a surge of connection with the young man across from her. A connection based on shared understanding rather than secret benefaction. Jason reached for his water glass, then set it down without drinking. I need to ask you something important, and I need complete honesty, Eleanor nodded, bracing herself. Was there ever a moment when you thought of me as more than a neighbor's son? As the child you never had? The question pierced directly to the heart of emotions Eleanor had never fully acknowledged, even to herself. Her eyes filled unexpectedly, and she found herself unable to speak for a moment. Yes, she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. Many times, when you graduated high school as valedictorian, when you were accepted to Harvard, when I saw your name in the medical school newsletter, recognized for research excellence. She paused, gathering courage for complete honesty. In those moments, I allowed myself to imagine what it might have been like if you had been ours. If Frank had lived to see the man you've become. Jason's own eyes glistened. I've never told anyone this, but I used to watch you and Professor Wilson from our window. The way you gardened together on weekends. How he carried your books when you walked to the university. I used to imagine what it would be like to have parents like you, educated, passionate about ideas, stable. The admission hung between them, mutual vulnerability creating a new equilibrium. Does it bother you? Eleanor asked quietly. Knowing now that your education came from me rather than an anonymous foundation? Jason considered the question carefully. Not bother exactly. It's overwhelming. I built my entire career on that. Support. Support I never knew came from someone watching me grow up. Someone who believed in me before I fully believed in myself. He reached for his water glass again, this time drinking deeply. I need some time to process this, he continued. And we need to decide about telling my mother. Eleanor hadn't considered this aspect. You think we should? Mom deserves to know. She's worked herself to exhaustion for 20 years believing we managed my education through scholarships and student loans. Finding out that our neighbor, now her roommate, was actually my anonymous benefactor will be, he searched for, the word significant. The understatement made Eleanor smile despite her anxiety. Significant seems inadequate. We should tell her together, Jason decided. After she moves in this weekend, she'll need time to adjust to the revelation, just as I do. As they left the restaurant, walking slowly back toward their building in the cool evening air, Eleanor felt lighter despite the uncertainty ahead. The secret that had weighed on her for 7 years had been spoken aloud, received not with rejection, but with thoughtful consideration. Jason stopped at the building entrance. I have night shift at the hospital, so I should head directly there. He hesitated, then asked, Do you regret telling me? Eleanor considered the question honestly. No. Whatever happens next, truth feels right. Jason nodded, studying her with new eyes, not just as his patient or neighbor, but as someone whose invisible hand had helped shape his destiny. Thank you, not just for tonight's honesty, but for 7 years of belief in my potential. As he turned to leave, he added, I've always wondered who was behind that foundation. I used to imagine it was someone who understood what it meant to overcome obstacles. I never imagined they were watching my journey from across the hall. Eleanor watched him walk away, his white coat folded over his arm, heading toward the hospital where he had saved her life, a life now irrevocably changed by the truth she had finally shared. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear as Eleanor prepared for Gloria's arrival. The spare bedroom had been thoroughly cleaned, Frank's remaining clothes finally packed away after 15 years, making space in the closet for Gloria's belongings. The apartment felt poised between past and future, much like Eleanor herself. She and Jason had spoken briefly by phone since their dinner, agreeing to tell Gloria the truth together once she was settled. The anticipation of this revelation created a persistent knot of anxiety in Eleanor's stomach that even her heart medication couldn't address. A knock at precisely 9 o'clock announced Gloria's arrival. Eleanor opened the door to find her new roommate standing amid several boxes and suitcases, her son beside her carrying a larger container. I travel light, Gloria joked, though the modest collection of belongings spoke volumes about her practical nature and limited means. The next hour passed in busy domesticity as they arranged Gloria's possessions in the spare room. Eleanor found herself unexpectedly touched by the few personal items Gloria unpacked. Framed photos of Jason's graduations, a handmade quilt from her mother, a small collection of nursing textbooks well worn from repeated study. Jason checked his watch. I need to leave for my shift by 11. Should we? His meaningful glance toward Eleanor completed the unspoken question. Eleanor nodded, her heart racing in a way that couldn't be healthy for her recent cardiac condition. Perhaps we could all sit down for a moment in the living room. There's something important we need to discuss. Gloria looked between them, confusion evident. Is everything okay? Your health hasn't taken a turn? My health is fine, Eleanor. assured her as they settled in the living room. "But there is something you should know about Jason's education and my involvement in it." Jason leaned forward, addressing his mother directly. "Mom, do you remember when I received the scholarship from the Wilson Educational Trust for medical school?" Gloria's face brightened. "Of course, the miracle that made everything possible. Why?" Jason glanced at Eleanor, who gathered her courage, and continued where he had left off. "Gloria, I established that foundation after my husband died. The Wilson in the foundation name refers to Frank and me. I've been anonymously funding Jason's medical education for the past 7 years." Silence filled the room as Gloria stared at Eleanor, incomprehension gradually giving way to disbelief. "That's not possible. Why would you do that? We barely knew each other." "I recognized Jason's potential and wanted to help ensure it wasn't limited by financial constraints," Eleanor explained, the practiced words sounding insufficient even to her own ears. Gloria stood abruptly, her expression hardening. "So for 7 years you've been secretly watching us, funding my son without my knowledge, living across the hall while I worked 3 jobs, worried about making ends meet, and you said nothing." The anger in her voice took Eleanor aback. She had anticipated surprise, perhaps even awkwardness, but not this raw sense of betrayal. "Mom," Jason interjected, "Eleanor's intentions were good. The foundation made my Harvard education possible." Gloria turned to her son. "And you're okay with this? Finding out our neighbor has been manipulating our lives from the shadows?" "Not manipulating," Eleanor protested. "Supporting. There were no conditions attached to the funding." "Except secrecy," Gloria shot back. "You deliberately kept this from us for years, and now I'm supposed to be, what, grateful? Living in your apartment? Dependent on your charity once again?" Jason stood, placing a hand on his mother's shoulder. "That's not fair. Eleanor just suffered a major health crisis. She didn't have to tell us the truth at all. But she did, and now everything changes." Gloria shook her head, visibly struggling with complex emotions. "Do you have any idea what it's like to discover that what you thought was your son's achievement, and your sacrifice to support him, was actually made possible by someone else's money? Someone watching from the periphery of our lives?" Eleanor hadn't anticipated this perspective, that her anonymous support might be experienced as undermining Gloria's maternal role and sacrifices rather than supplementing them. "Your sacrifices made Jason who he is," Eleanor said quietly. "My financial support was just one factor in his success. His character, his work ethic, his compassion, those came from you." Gloria's expression remained troubled. "I need some air, some time to think." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "I appreciate what you did for Jason. I do. But I'm not sure I can live here knowing what I know now." As the door closed behind Gloria, Jason and Eleanor sat in stunned silence. After several moments, Jason spoke. "I should go after her." Eleanor nodded, unable to find adequate words for the situation they now faced. The truth she had finally shared had not led to the resolution she'd hoped for, but to a new and unexpected conflict. As Jason left to find his mother, Eleanor remained on the sofa, confronting the possibility that her well-intentioned philanthropy and subsequent revelation had irreparably damaged her relationship with the Rodriguez family. The secret had been a burden, but perhaps the truth was proving to be an even heavier one. The apartment felt suddenly empty, the spare bedroom half filled with Gloria's possessions, physical manifestations of a transition now thrown into uncertainty. Eleanor had reached the point of no return, the moment when past decisions collided irreversibly with present reality. Whatever happened next would fundamentally change all their lives. In the quiet aftermath, Eleanor faced her most difficult question yet. Had her revelation been truly about honesty and connection, or had it been, at least partly, about easing her own conscience? And if Gloria couldn't accept the truth of their intertwined histories, what became of the genuine bond that had formed during Eleanor's recovery. The foundation had been Eleanor's attempt to make a difference from a safe distance. Now that distance had collapsed entirely, leaving her more vulnerable than any heart attack had made her. Facing not just physical mortality, but the potential death of relationships that had unexpectedly become essential to her emotional survival. 3 days passed with no word from Gloria. Her belongings remained in the spare bedroom, but she had not returned to the apartment. Jason called once to let Eleanor know his mother was staying with a colleague temporarily, to process everything. The silence that followed his brief update spoke volumes about his own conflicted feelings. Eleanor moved through her days mechanically, maintaining the routines that had structured her life for years: morning tea, newspaper, afternoon walk, as her strengthening heart now allowed. But these activities felt hollow, mere motions without meaning. The journal Jason had given her remained open on her desk, its pages filling with increasingly introspective reflections. "I believed anonymity was selflessness," she wrote on the third evening of silence. "But I'm beginning to understand. It was actually fear. Fear of rejection, fear of connection, fear of the vulnerability that comes with being known. By keeping my generosity secret, I maintained control of the narrative, of the relationship, of my emotional investment. Was that truly generosity, or something more complicated?" The question haunted her as she prepared for bed. A thunderstorm had moved in, rain lashing against the windows in a way that reminded her of the night of her heart attack. As lightning illuminated her bedroom, Eleanor found herself reaching for Frank's photograph, seeking guidance from the man who had known her better than anyone. "I've made a mess of things," she told the silent image, "trying to do good from a distance, then revealing the truth without fully considering the consequences. Gloria feels manipulated rather than helped. Perhaps she's right." Sleep eluded her as the storm intensified. Near midnight, unexpected knocking at her door startled her fully awake. Through the peephole, she was surprised to see Jason, rain-soaked and clearly distressed. "I'm sorry for the late hour," he said as she opened the door. "I needed to talk to you." Eleanor ushered him inside, noting his hospital scrubs beneath his drenched coat. "Has something happened? Is Gloria all right?" "She's fine, physically." Jason removed his wet coat, running a hand through damp hair. "But we had an intense conversation tonight about you, the foundation, everything." Eleanor gestured toward the kitchen. "Let me make some tea. You look chilled." As she prepared the tea, Eleanor braced herself for whatever difficult message Jason had come to deliver. Had Gloria decided to cut ties completely? Was Jason himself having second thoughts about their connection now that he'd had time to process the revelation? "Mom told me something tonight I never knew," Jason began once they were seated with steaming mugs. "When I was first accepted to Harvard Medical School, she actually applied for a loan using our apartment as collateral. She was denied because the building was too old, considered high risk." Eleanor hadn't known this, couldn't have known. That must have been devastating. For her, it was. "She was preparing to tell me I'd have to choose a different school when the Wilson Foundation letter arrived. She called it a miracle sent directly from heaven." Jason stared into his tea. "She's built an entire narrative around that miracle. God, watching out for us, rewarding her faith and sacrifice." Eleanor began to understand the deeper source of Gloria's distress. And now that miracle has a very human face. Mine. Jason nodded. Finding out that our neighbor, someone we interacted with casually for years, was behind that miracle, it's shaken her understanding of our entire story. "I never intended to deceive her," Eleanor said quietly. "The anonymity wasn't about deception, but about dignity. I didn't want either of you to feel obligated to me." "I know that now," Jason replied. "And I think Mom does too, intellectually. But emotionally, it's complex. She built her identity around being the single mother who sacrificed everything for her son's success. Your revelation doesn't negate her sacrifices, but it does complicate the narrative she's lived by. Eleanor considered this carefully. Perhaps I should speak with her directly. Actually, she asked me to bring you something. Jason reached into his bag and extracted a worn leather book. This is Mom's journal from when I was in medical school. She wants you to read it before you talk again. Eleanor accepted the journal with surprise and reverence, understanding the profound trust this represented. Are you certain? Jason nodded. She said, and I quote, "If we're going to live together, really live together, not just share space, then we need to understand each other's stories completely." Hope flickered unexpectedly in Eleanor's chest. She's still considering moving in? She's processing, but yes, she said something else that resonated with me. God works in mysterious ways, sometimes through people we least expect. Jason smiled slightly. In Mom's worldview, maybe you were the instrument of divine intervention rather than its replacement. After Jason left, promising to return the following evening with Gloria, Eleanor settled in her reading chair with the journal. Opening its pages felt like entering sacred space, the private thoughts of a woman who had struggled, sacrificed, and persevered through challenges Eleanor had observed but never fully understood. The early entries detailed Gloria's shock and joy at Jason's Harvard acceptance, followed by despair when financing seemed impossible. Then came the miraculous scholarship letter, prompting pages of tearful gratitude to God and lengthy contemplations about divine purpose. But what truly moved Eleanor were the entries describing Gloria's daily life during those 7 years. Working multiple jobs, studying for nursing prerequisites between shifts, carefully budgeting every dollar while still finding small ways to celebrate Jason's achievements. One entry described how Gloria had saved for months to buy a professional stethoscope for his white coat ceremony, going without new work shoes to afford it. As dawn broke, Eleanor closed the journal, her perspective fundamentally transformed. Her financial contribution, significant as it had been, represented just one thread in the complex tapestry of Jason's journey to becoming a doctor. Gloria's sacrifices, emotional support, and unwavering belief in her son had been equally essential, perhaps more so. The revelation humbled Eleanor. For years, she had privately taken satisfaction in being Jason's anonymous benefactor, occasionally indulging in the fantasy that her support had made his success possible. The reality was far more nuanced. She had provided important resources, yes, but the foundation of his achievement lay in his own determination and his mother's steadfast love. This understanding shifted something profound within Eleanor. The heart attack had forced her to confront her physical mortality. Now Gloria's journal compelled her to reconsider her legacy more broadly. What truly mattered wasn't the money she had provided, but the human connections that gave life meaning. As morning light filled her apartment, Eleanor opened her own journal and began writing with new clarity. For 15 years, I've defined myself by absence and loss. Now I'm being offered the chance to define myself through presence and connection. The question is whether I have the courage to accept this gift, a gift perhaps greater than any I've given. Evening brought rain again, softer this time, a gentle percussion against the windows as Eleanor prepared dinner. She had spent the day reading and rereading Gloria's journal, each passage deepening her understanding of the woman who had shared the hallway with her for decades, but whom she had never truly known. At precisely 7, the doorbell rang. Eleanor took a steadying breath before opening the door to find Gloria and Jason standing side by side, their expressions serious but not hostile. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said, ushering them inside. The apartment was filled with the aroma of cooking, a hearty vegetable soup simmering on the stove, fresh bread warming in the oven. Simple comfort food that somehow seemed appropriate for this pivotal conversation. "I've read your journal," Eleanor began once they were seated in the living room. Thank you for trusting me with your story. It was illuminating. Gloria nodded, her posture still holding tension, but her eyes softer than they had been days earlier. And I've had time to think about yours. Jason helped me see perspectives I initially missed. Jason remained quiet, clearly having decided this conversation needed to unfold primarily between the two women. I owe you an apology, Elena continued. Not for the financial support itself, but for the secrecy that now feels more self-protective than selfless. You deserve to know. Perhaps, Gloria acknowledged. But I've been asking myself whether I would have accepted direct help from you back then. My pride was fierce. It still is. Anonymous support allowed me to attribute our good fortune to God rather than charity, preserving my sense of independence. The insight surprised Elena. I hadn't considered that perspective. The truth is, Gloria continued, leaning forward slightly, I'm still processing complex feelings about all this. Gratitude, certainly, but also embarrassment, a sense of having been observed without my knowledge, questions about whether our friendly neighbor relationship over the years was genuine or obligation. It was genuine, Eleanor insisted. The foundation was structured specifically to prevent obligation from entering our interactions. I valued our neighborly relationship for what it was, limited as that may have been. Jason finally spoke. I think what's happening now is that both of you are being offered something neither expected. The possibility of a deeper connection based on complete truth. Both women turned to him, surprised by his insight. Mom, you've always taught me that God works through people. Maybe Eleanor was the instrument for the miracle you've always believed in. He turned to Eleanor. And maybe Mom and I are the family connection you've been missing since Professor Wilson died. The simple statement hung in the air, naming an unspoken truth that had been evolving since Eleanor's heart attack brought them into closer proximity. Gloria was the first to respond. When I was sitting with Jason in the hospital waiting room, during your surgery, praying you would survive, I had no idea I was praying for the person who had made my son's career possible. She shook her head, smiling slightly. Life has strange symmetry sometimes. Perfect symmetry, Eleanor agreed. Jason saved my life using the very skills his education provided. Which you helped fund, Gloria added, the circle complete. The atmosphere in the room had shifted subtly, tension giving way to something approaching wonder at the intertwined nature of their lives. I've been thinking about practical matters, Gloria said after a moment. The roommate arrangement we discussed. I'd still like to proceed with it if you're willing, but with new terms. What terms? Eleanor asked cautiously. Equality, Gloria stated firmly. I pay proper rent, no charity discount. I contribute to household expenses proportionally to my income, and we approach this as two independent women choosing to share space, not as benefactor and recipient. The clarity and dignity of the proposal touched Eleanor deeply. Those terms are eminently acceptable. And one more thing, Gloria added. Complete honesty going forward. No more significant secrets between us. If we're going to live together, we need to know each other truthfully. Eleanor nodded, unexpectedly moved by the second chance being offered. Complete honesty. Jason watched them with evident relief. Then it settled. Mom moves in as planned, and I continue to be the doctor for both of the most stubborn women I know. Eleanor found herself laughing, the sound surprising after days of tension. I suspect your mother and I both take that as a compliment. Absolutely, Gloria agreed, her own smile breaking through. They moved to the kitchen together, the continuation of their conversation flowing more naturally as they served the simple meal Eleanor had prepared. The transition wasn't seamless. Moments of awkwardness still surfaced as they navigated their redefined relationship. But the fundamental shift had occurred. Truth had been spoken, received, and accepted, however imperfectly. As they ate together, at Eleanor's dining table, the same table where teenage Jason had studied by candlelight years earlier. Eleanor found herself observing Gloria with new appreciation. The strength that had enabled her to raise a son alone, work multiple jobs, and pursue education against significant odds was now evident in how she faced this unexpected revelation. With initial anger, yes, but ultimately with grace and pragmatism. "There's something else you should know," Eleanor said as they finished dinner. "The foundation made its final payment last quarter. Jason's education is fully funded, and the foundation's purpose is complete." Gloria looked up sharply. "What happens to the foundation now?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided complete honesty required complete disclosure. According to its bylaws, any remaining funds transfer to a scholarship for underrepresented students at Harvard Medical School. The foundation dissolves, and the records are sealed for 25 years. "A legacy that continues," Jason noted, "supporting others the way you supported me." "That was always the intention," Eleanor confirmed, "for the foundation to make a difference beyond a single student." Gloria studied Eleanor for a long moment. "You've lived so quietly all these years, few people knowing the impact you were having. Why?" The question cut to the heart of Eleanor's character, forcing her to articulate what had been largely instinctive. "After Frank died, I discovered that visible philanthropy often creates distance. People see the donation rather than the person. Anonymous giving allowed me to make a difference without that barrier. But it created a different kind of distance," Gloria observed gently. "The distance of secrecy." Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the insight. "A distance I'm only now learning to bridge." As the evening concluded with plans for Gloria to move her remaining belongings the following day, Eleanor realized they had navigated the crisis point. Not with perfect resolution, life rarely offered that, but with mutual understanding and a willingness to move forward together. The heart attack that had threatened Eleanor's life had ultimately led to something she hadn't experienced in 15 years, the beginning of genuine family connection. Not by blood or marriage, but through the complex interweaving of lives that had been connected far longer and more deeply than any of them had realized. 1 year later. The rooftop garden had flourished under Gloria's careful attention. New herbs Eleanor had never considered now grew alongside the traditional rosemary and thyme, their varied scents creating a complex aromatic symphony. Containers of medicinal plants, Gloria's special interest, occupied the sunniest corner, a practical extension of her nursing studies. Eleanor settled into her favorite chair, cup of afternoon tea steaming in the spring sunshine. From this vantage point, she could see clear to the Charles River, Harvard's red brick buildings, and, just visible in the distance, the distinctive architecture of Massachusetts General Hospital, where Jason now served as an attending physician. The past year had transformed Eleanor's life in ways she could never have predicted that fateful day when chest pain interrupted her gardening. Her heart had healed well, exceeding her doctor's expectations, including Jason, who continued to monitor her condition with professional care tempered by familial concern. But the physical healing paled compared to the emotional renovation she had undergone. The apartment below, once her solitary sanctuary, now hummed with shared life. Gloria's nursing textbooks mingled with Eleanor's literature on bookshelves. The spare bedroom had become a genuine second bedroom, personalized with Gloria's possessions. The kitchen hosted cooking experiments as Gloria introduced Eleanor to Puerto Rican recipes from her childhood, while Eleanor shared the French techniques Frank had loved. They had found a rhythm as roommates that respected individual independence while fostering genuine connection. Gloria worked her hospital shifts and attended advanced nursing classes. Eleanor continued her part-time university mentoring and literacy center volunteering. Their paths crossed naturally throughout the week, conversations flowing without obligation or strain. The door to the roof opened and Gloria emerged carrying a tray with sliced fruit and her own tea. "Perfect timing," Eleanor noted, smiling at her roommate. "I was just admiring your medicinal garden. The echinacea is thriving." Gloria set the tray on the small table between their chairs. Wait until you see what I've started from cuttings downstairs. If my final practical exam goes well next week, we'll celebrate by expanding to that empty section near the mint. The easy domesticity between them had evolved gradually. Over months, initial awkwardness giving way to genuine friendship. They remained different in many ways, Gloria's practical spirituality contrasting with Eleanor's academic secularism, their tastes in music and entertainment often divergent. But these differences had become points of interest rather than division. "Jason called while you were napping," Gloria mentioned, adjusting her chair to catch the afternoon sun. "He's bringing Angela for dinner on Sunday." Eleanor smiled at the mention of Jason's girlfriend, a pediatric resident he had been dating for several months. "Lovely. I'll make that coq au vin she enjoyed last time." The relationship developing between Jason and Angela represented another unexpected joy in Eleanor's life. Watching him build a personal life alongside his promising career fulfilled hopes she hadn't acknowledged harboring. His regular Sunday dinners at the apartment had become a highlight of her week, a family ritual that filled a void she had stopped noticing after years of solitude. "Oh, and this came for you," Gloria added, reaching into her pocket and extracting an official-looking envelope. Harvard Medical School letterhead. Eleanor accepted the envelope with curiosity. Opening it, she found a formal invitation to the dedication of the Rodriguez Wilson Scholarship Fund for first-generation medical students. According to the enclosed letter, Jason had established the fund with his first significant salary as an attending physician, naming it to honor the two women whose sacrifices and support made my own education possible. Emotion caught in Eleanor's throat as she passed the letter to Gloria, who read it with widening eyes. "He didn't tell us he was doing this," Gloria said, her voice thick with pride. "A good secret, for once," Eleanor noted, the irony not lost on either of them. As they sat together absorbing this news, Eleanor reflected on the journey of the past year. The heart attack had initiated not just physical recovery, but a profound internal transformation. The carefully constructed walls that had defined her life for 15 years had crumbled, revealing not vulnerability as she had feared, but possibility. At 63, Eleanor Wilson had discovered something unexpected. Family could be found rather than born, constructed through shared experience rather than shared DNA. The anonymous foundation she had established years ago had completed its official purpose, but its true legacy continued in the connections it had ultimately fostered. "What are you thinking about?" Gloria asked, noting Eleanor's contemplative expression. "Circles," Eleanor replied. "How life completes them in unexpected ways." Gloria nodded, understanding without further explanation. "Jason says Angela might be joining that new community health initiative in Roxbury, the one serving uninsured patients." "He mentioned that possibility," Eleanor confirmed. "His interest in serving underrepresented communities seems to have influenced her. Values transfer between people who care about each other," Gloria observed. "Just as your values influenced my son, perhaps without you realizing it." The insight resonated with Eleanor, who had never considered her anonymous philanthropy as having impact beyond its financial aspect. But Jason's new scholarship fund suggested otherwise. He had internalized not just the opportunity her money had provided, but the principle of creating opportunity for others. The sun began its slow descent, casting golden light across the rooftop garden. Soon they would go downstairs to prepare dinner, continuing their evening routine. Tomorrow would bring Gloria's nursing classes and Eleanor's literacy center volunteering. Sunday would bring Jason and Angela for family dinner. The rhythm of shared life continued, enriched by connection rather than diminished by dependency as Eleanor had once feared. Eleanor's phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Her 6-month cardiac checkup was scheduled for next Tuesday. The notification no longer triggered anxiety, but rather appreciation. Without that heart attack, the moment when her physical heart
had faltered, she might never have opened her metaphorical heart to the connections that now sustained her. "We should invite Dr. Feldman to the scholarship dedication," Eleanor suggested, thinking of her longtime physician who had obliquely
known about the foundation. He'd appreciate seeing how everything connected in the end. Full circle, Gloria agreed, using the phrase that had become something of a mantra between them. As evening approached, bringing cooling air and lengthening shadows, Eleanor Wilson surveyed the life she now lived. So different from what she had imagined a year earlier, yet somehow more authentic than anything she had experienced since Frank's death. She had spent 7 years anonymously funding Jason's education, believing distance protected both giver and receiver. Now she understood that the greatest gift had come through proximity rather than distance, through revealed truth rather than comfortable secrecy. The heart that had physically failed her had ultimately led her to emotional wholeness. The doctor whose education she had anonymously funded had not only saved her life, but had helped her discover what made that life truly worth living. The family she had found, rather than the one she had lost. Eleanor raised her teacup slightly, a private toast to Frank, wherever he might be. "You were right," she whispered too softly for Gloria to hear. "Our capacity for love wasn't finite after all.